I noticed the shadow when I was already passing it. At first, it looked like a fallen branch or a trash bag caught on a tree trunk. Something dark, low, completely still. The kind of thing you see near rural roads all the time and forget a second later. I drove another few yards before my foot lifted off the gas on its own. I do not know why I stopped. The road was empty, stretching straight through the forest damp from the night air. Early morning light filtered between the trees, pale and cold. No houses, no traffic, no sound except my engine cooling down. I opened the door and stepped out, telling myself I would just take a quick look. As I walked closer, the shape did not change. That was the first wrong thing. Animals usually move. Even injured ones react to footsteps, to voices, to presence. This one did nothing. Then I saw the ears. They were flattened against the head, barely visible through dirty, matted fur. The body was pressed low to the ground, ribs faintly rising and falling. A lynx. Not large, but fully grown. Close enough now I could see the rope. It was tied around her neck. The rope ran from the lynx to the tree, wrapped twice around the trunk and knotted tight. Old rope, rough, darkened by moisture. Whoever tied it knew it would hold. Her front legs were bent under her, claws half sunk into the soil as if she had tried to pull back and failed. I stopped where I was. The distance between us felt suddenly very small. The lynx opened her eyes. One of them was swollen, barely open, the other fixed on me immediately. There was no confusion in that look, only pain and warning. Her chest moved again, shallow but steady, and I realized with a sharp, unpleasant clarity that she was still alive. My first thought was that I was too close. My second was that someone had done this on purpose. There were no traps, no signs of an accident. The rope was cleanly cut at one end and tied carefully at the other. She had not wandered here and gotten stuck. She had been brought here. I took a step back. The lynx growled. It was low and weak, but real. Her head lifted an inch, maybe two, before dropping again. That small movement seemed to cost her everything. I stood there, listening to my own breathing, aware of how exposed I was on the side of the road. I could still get back in the car. I could still leave. No one would know. The thought lasted less than a second. I had already seen her eyes. Whatever was supposed to happen here had not finished yet, and I understood, standing there in the cold morning air, that I was now part of it. I did not move closer right away. The lynx watched me without blinking, her body tense despite the way it sagged against the rope. Pain had not dulled her instincts. It had sharpened them. Every breath came with a faint tremor through her sides, and the smell reached me then, sharp and sour, a mix of blood and damp fur. I forced myself to look carefully. Her back leg was wrong, not bent naturally, not resting. The paw lay twisted under her body, dark with dried blood. Flies hovered near the wound, slow and confident, as if they had already decided how this would end. The fur around her neck was rubbed raw where the rope had cut in. Each time she shifted, the fibers scraped against skin. I took another step back, then stopped. The road behind me was still empty, no engines, no voices. Just the forest and the quiet pressure of time. I pulled my jacket tighter, more out of habit than cold, and spoke without thinking. Easy. I am not coming closer. The lynx reacted instantly. Her lips pulled back, showing teeth yellowed and chipped. The sound that came out of her was louder this time, rough and broken but full of intent. Her front claws dug into the ground as she tried to lift herself, failed and slammed back down. I felt my pulse jump. This was not a movie scene. There would be no calm approach, no gentle hand, no miracle moment where a wild animal understood my intentions. She saw me as a threat because that was the only safe assumption left to her. I scanned the ground, looking for anything that could explain what had happened. There were scuff marks in the dirt, deep grooves where she had tried to drag herself away from the tree. The soil was torn up in a wide circle. She had been fighting the rope for hours, maybe longer. My phone felt suddenly heavy in my pocket. If I rushed this, she could attack. Even injured, even half-starved, a lynx could tear open skin and muscle in seconds. If I backed away completely, she would stay here, tied to a tree, until either her strength or her breathing gave out. I crouched slowly, keeping my distance, making sure my movements stayed wide and visible. My eyes never left her face. Her ears flicked at every sound. every shift of gravel under my boots. "I am staying," I said quietly, though I was not sure who I was saying it for. The words did not calm her, but they settled something in me. Whatever help would come next, it would not happen fast, and it would not happen without risk. Standing there on the roadside, with a wounded wild animal tied to a tree, I understood that leaving was the only choice I no longer had. I forced myself to look away from her for a moment. Staring at the lynx would not explain how she ended up here. I needed to understand the ground, the space around the tree, the quiet details people usually miss when they want to leave fast. I moved slowly, keeping her in the corner of my vision, and scanned the roadside. The tire tracks were easy to spot once I knew what I was looking for. They cut off the asphalt and into the dirt shoulder, deep enough to leave a clear pattern. Not old, the edges were still sharp, pressed into damp soil from the night. A vehicle had stopped here recently, close enough for someone to step out without walking far. Near the tree, half hidden under leaves, I saw a cigarette butt. Then another. They were crushed into the ground, filters flattened by a boot. Someone had stood here for a while, long enough to smoke, long enough to tie a knot and make sure it held. I felt something tighten in my chest as I followed the marks around the trunk. The rope told the rest of the story. A second piece lay a few feet away, cleanly cut. The fibers were frayed at the end, stiff and dry, like they had been exposed to air for hours. This was not a snapped line, not an accident. Someone had brought rope here with a purpose, used part of it, and taken the rest with them. I crouched near the ground, my fingers hovering just above the dirt, not touching anything. The scuff marks were everywhere, wide arcs where the lynx had dragged herself backward, short, frantic grooves where her claws had slipped. She had fought until her strength ran out. I stood up slowly. The anger came without warning, hot, sharp, difficult to control. It was not the kind that makes you shout or punch something. It was heavier than that, the kind that settles in your stomach and refuses to move. Someone had decided this animal was inconvenient, dangerous, unwanted. Instead of dealing with it, they had tied her to a tree by the road and walked away, trusting hunger, pain, or cold to finish the job. I looked down the road in both directions. Nothing. No houses, no cameras, no witnesses. Just a quiet stretch of forest where cruelty could happen without interruption. The idea that this was deliberate, calm, and planned made it worse than if it had been a mistake. I turned back toward the lynx. She was watching me again, her breathing shallow, her body still pressed low. She did not know about tire tracks, or cigarettes, or cut rope. She only knew that someone had left her here, and that I had not. The realization settled in, heavy and unavoidable. Whatever happened next, it would not erase what had already been done. But standing there, surrounded by the evidence people thought no one would notice, I understood exactly why leaving now would make me no better than them. I stepped farther from the tree before pulling out my phone. The lynx followed the movement with her eyes, muscles tightening again, but she did not try to rise. I turned my back just enough to get a signal and dialed the first number that came to mind. Wildlife Control. The line rang until it dropped. No voicemail. I tried again, slower this time, as if patience might change the outcome. Nothing. I checked the time. Too early. Or too late. I could not tell anymore. I called a nearby animal shelter next. A recorded voice answered, calm and cheerful, listing office hours that did not include today. I hung up before it finished. My fingers moved faster than my thoughts now, scrolling, dialing, ending calls that led nowhere. A veterinary clinic picked up on the fourth try. A woman answered, her voice tight with the sound of a busy morning. I explained what I had found, keeping my words short, clear. Lynx, tied to a tree, injured, still alive. There was a pause, then a breath. She said they did not handle wild animals. She said it was dangerous. She gave me another number and wished me luck. I thanked her and hung up. The next call went to voicemail. The one after that rang unanswered. I left messages I was not sure anyone would hear, my voice steady only because I forced it to be. With every call, I felt the minutes sliding past, thin and sharp. I glanced back at the tree. The lynx had shifted slightly, her head lower now, chin nearly touching the dirt. Her breathing was still there, but slower. The rope creaked faintly as she moved, a sound that made my jaw tighten. I tried emergency services, explaining again, changing nothing. The response was careful, distant. They told me to stay back, They told me someone might be sent if a unit was available. They did not give a time. I ended the call and stood there, phone in my hand, staring at the screen. This was the gap people fall into when they assume help will come automatically. The space between rules and reality, where responsibility sits unanswered. No one on the other end could see her eyes. No one could smell the blood or hear the rope scrape against bark. I looked down the road once more, still empty. I put the phone away. If I waited for permission, she would not last. If I rushed in blind, I could make it worse. The decision forming in my chest was heavy and uncomfortable, but clear. Whatever happened next, I would not be able to say I was just waiting for someone else to do something. I moved only after I decided exactly where I would stop. The rope was the problem. As long as it stayed tight, she would keep choking every time she shifted. If I could loosen it even a little, she might breathe easier. That thought pushed me forward, one careful step at a time, boots slow on gravel. I kept my body turned slightly sideways, hands visible, movements wide and deliberate. My eyes stayed on her shoulders and head, watching for any sign of tension building too fast. "Easy," I said, quietly, more to steady myself than to calm her. The lynx did not believe me. Her ears flattened instantly. Her lips curled back, and the sound she made was sharp and sudden, ripping through the quiet like torn fabric. She lunged as far as the rope allowed, front claws slashing the air where my legs had been a second earlier. I jumped back on instinct. The rope snapped tight against the tree, jerking her head sideways. She lost balance and collapsed again, hitting the ground hard. The impact knocked the breath from her, and for a terrifying moment, she did not move at all. My heart hammered. I stood frozen, every muscle locked, waiting for her chest to rise. When it finally did, slow and uneven, my knees felt weak with relief. I had wanted to help, and I had almost killed her instead. She dragged herself a few inches backward, claws scraping uselessly against dirt, and growled again. The sound was weaker now, more warning than threat, but it carried the same message. "Do not come closer." I raised my hands and backed away until the tension in her body eased slightly. The rope creaked as she shifted, the knot biting deeper into bark. I could see now how little room there was for error. One wrong move, one step too fast, and she would react before I could think. I scanned the ground until I spotted a fallen branch, thick enough to reach the rope without bringing my body close. I lifted it slowly, letting her see it, stopping when her eyes locked onto the movement. It was not enough. The moment the branch touched the rope, she exploded into motion again. Teeth snapped shut inches from the wood. The branch jerked in my grip, nearly ripped away. I stumbled, barely keeping my footing as she hit the end of the rope once more. I dropped the branch. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. She lay there, sides heaving, eyes fixed on me with raw, exhausted fury. I realized then that force, even gentle force, was not the answer. I stepped back until the distance felt safe again. Helping her would not mean cutting the rope right now. It would mean keeping her alive long enough to do it right. Standing there, heart still racing, I understood how thin the line was between rescue and a mistake that could never be undone. The sound of another engine cut through the stillness. At first I thought I imagined it. Then gravel crunched behind me, slow and cautious, and a pickup rolled to a stop on the shoulder. I turned just as the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, mid-30s maybe, baseball cap pulled low. He took one look at me, then followed my line of sight to the tree. He froze. "What is that?" he asked. "A lynx," I said, "tied up." He swore under his breath and took a step forward before stopping himself. The lynx lifted her head immediately, ears flattening again. The rope tightened as she shifted. "Do not get closer," I said. "She will lunge." He nodded, hands raised, palms open. "I am not here to mess this up. I just saw you stopped and thought something was wrong." We stood side by side at a careful distance, two strangers connected by the same problem. He glanced at the rope, the wounds, the torn ground, and shook his head. "Someone did this on purpose," he said. I told him about the calls, the unanswered numbers, the warnings without solutions. He listened without interrupting, eyes never leaving the lynx for long. "I have a cable cutter in the truck," he said finally, "for work. But cutting it right now would be bad. I agreed. If she panicked without support, she could break her neck or attack whoever was closest. We needed control, not speed. We talked low, quick sentences, testing ideas and discarding them just as fast. Blanket, too risky, tranquilizer, impossible, waiting, dangerous. He rubbed his face and exhaled. There is a crate in the back, not made for a lynx, but solid. If we can guide her movement instead of forcing it, maybe. Guide how? I asked. With distance, he said, and patience. The plan was thin, full of gaps, but it was the first thing that felt like forward motion. He went back to the truck slowly, deliberately, as if every step mattered. The lynx watched him go, muscles tight, eyes burning with suspicion. When he returned, dragging the crate partway out, she growled again, weaker but still sharp. Easy, he said softly. I am not coming closer than he did. For the first time since morning, I was not alone with the weight of the decision. Trusting a stranger was another risk, but standing there together, measuring distance and timing, we both understood the same thing. If this was going to work at all, it would only work if we did it together. Moving her took longer than I expected. We did not rush. Rushing had almost killed her once already. The man brought the crate closer in small increments, sliding it over gravel, stopping every time her breathing changed. I stayed opposite him, keeping her focus split, my voice low and steady. Easy. Stay still. We are not touching you. The lynx barely lifted her head now. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, the fight draining out of her in uneven waves. That scared me more than the aggression had. Pain could keep her alert. Exhaustion could shut her down without warning. We angled the crate so the open side faced the tree. Using the fallen branch again, slower this time, we guided the rope just enough to give her a path forward without tightening it. She resisted at first, then stopped, as if the effort was no longer worth it. When she finally crossed the threshold into the crate, it happened quietly. No lunge, no sound, just a heavy collapse as her body gave in. We shut the door immediately and secured it, hands shaking only after it was done. The rope stayed loose now, no longer pulling against her neck. I leaned against the truck for a second, breathing hard. We loaded the crate carefully into the bed, padding it with whatever we had. Jackets, a tarp, anything to keep it from sliding. The man checked the straps twice, then a third time. I will drive slow, he said. Please do. The road felt different from the passenger seat. Every bump sent a jolt through me. My eyes locked on the crate in the mirror. The lynx did not move. Her sides rose and fell, shallow but steady, and I counted each breath without meaning to. Miles passed in tense silence. The forest blurred by, green and indifferent. Time stretched, elastic and fragile. I imagined everything that could go wrong. The crate tipping, her breathing stopping, a sudden turn forcing us to brake too hard. Slow down, I said once, my voice tight. He eased off the gas immediately without arguing. We drove like that for what felt like hours, though it could not have been more than a short stretch of road. Every kilometer was a negotiation between speed and safety, between urgency and restraint. When we finally saw the sign for the clinic ahead, relief hit me so fast it almost hurt. I did not let myself believe it was over, not yet. The crate shifted slightly as we turned into the lot, then settled again. The lynx was still breathing. For now, that was enough. The clinic doors opened faster than I expected. 2 people came out as soon as the truck stopped, both moving with the calm urgency of those who had seen too many emergencies to panic. They asked short questions while we lowered the crate, their eyes already scanning for problems. How long has she been like this? Do you know what caused the injury? I answered as clearly as I could. Found this morning, tied to a tree, back leg injured, trouble breathing. They nodded and took over without hesitation. Inside, the smell changed immediately. Clean, sharp, sterile. The crate was placed on the floor, and one of them slipped on thick gloves while the other prepared a syringe. There was no drama, no raised voices, just practiced movement. The sedative worked slowly. The lynx stirred once, a low sound catching in her throat, then went still. Only then did they open the crate fully. I stayed back, hands clenched, watching from the doorway as they lifted her onto the table. The injuries were worse up close. The back leg showed clear signs of trauma, swelling, unnatural angle, deep tissue damage. The skin around her neck was raw, bruised in a tight ring where the rope had cut in. Dehydration showed in the dullness of her eyes, the tightness of her skin. One of the vets pressed gently along her ribs, listening. "She has been struggling to breathe for a while," he said. "Stress and pressure on the airway. Another few hours like this would have been very bad." I swallowed. X-rays were taken. Blood was drawn. Numbers were read quietly between them, not meant for me, but I caught enough to understand the tone. Serious, unstable, not hopeless. The woman looked up at me. "You did the right thing bringing her in when you did," she said. "Any later and we might not be having this conversation." They moved her to a recovery area, connecting monitors, adjusting fluids. The beeping was slow, steady, painfully loud in the silence. I stood there longer than I realized, staring at a chest that rose and fell under clean white light. She looked smaller now, less dangerous, just injured. Hope settled in carefully, like something fragile that could break if touched too hard. She was alive. That mattered. But no one promised she would stay that way. The waiting room emptied out quickly. The man who had helped me stayed long enough to make sure she was stable, then nodded once and left, his job calling him back to a different life. I did not follow. I sat down on the hard chair against the wall and stayed where I was. No one asked me to remain. A nurse offered coffee. I shook my head. The cup would have gone cold in my hands anyway. The clock above the door moved with a quiet, deliberate click, each minute marking time I could not speed up. Through the glass I could see her. Machines surrounded the table now, wires tracing careful lines over fur that had been cleaned and trimmed. The wild shape I had met by the road looked smaller here, contained by white walls and steady light. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but consistent. I counted the movement without realizing it, again and again, as if my attention could keep it going. Hours passed like this. People walked by, speaking softly, carrying charts, opening doors that led to places I could not enter. The world continued its routines around us, indifferent to how close she had come to disappearing entirely. At one point, a vet stopped beside me. "She is holding," he said. "That is all I can tell you right now." I nodded. Holding was enough. I thought about the road. About the quiet tree and the rope cutting into her neck. About how easily I could have driven past without noticing anything out of place. The distance between that version of the morning and this room felt unreal. I told myself I could leave. She was in professional hands now. Staying would not change the outcome. No one expected me to be here when she woke up, if she woke up at all. Still, I did not move. Somewhere between the hours and the silence, the attachment settled in. Not ownership, not obligation, just the simple awareness that I had seen her when no one else had, and that mattered. When the lights dimmed slightly for the evening shift, I was still there. My phone buzzed with messages I ignored. Outside, the day faded without me noticing. She breathed. That was the only measure I trusted. As long as it continued, I stayed, sitting quietly in a place where wild animals were not meant to be, waiting without knowing exactly what I was waiting for. Morning light crept into the clinic without asking. I noticed it only when the reflection on the glass shifted, turning the room from gray to pale gold. I had slept sitting up, head against the wall, waking every time the monitors changed their rhythm. A veterinarian approached quietly, holding a tablet. "We need to talk about next steps," he said. He led me to a small office away from the recovery area. The door closed softly behind us, muting the sounds of machines and movement. On the screen, images appeared. X-rays. Notes. Measurements I did not fully understand but could read in his expression. "The leg will heal," he said. "Not quickly. She will need surgery and months of recovery. Stress has done as much damage as the rope." I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest all night. "Can she go back to the wild?" He hesitated, just long enough. "Not right away. Maybe not ever. That depends on how she recovers and how she adapts. She has been handled, transported, treated. That changes things." Another specialist joined us, flipping through reports. They talked about rehabilitation centers, about controlled environments, about minimizing human contact while still providing care. Every option came with risks. Infection, stress, loss of survival skills. There were no clean answers. I realized then that rescue was not a single act. It was a chain of decisions, each one heavier than the last. Saving her life had only opened the door to harder questions. "What happens if she cannot hunt again?" I asked. "Then she will not be released," the woman said gently. "Not because we failed, but because survival would be worse than captivity." The words sat between us, uncomfortable and honest. They asked about the location where she was found, about the rope, about whether anyone else had seen her. Their questions were careful, professional, but I could hear the weight behind them. This was not rare enough to shock them. When the conversation ended, I returned to the recovery area. She was awake now, eyes open, unfocused but alert. The wildness was still there, quiet and contained. She did not recognize me, and that was how it should be. Standing there, I understood something I had not before. The road had not been the end of her story. It had been the beginning of a path none of us could fully map. Whatever came next would take time, patience, and choices without guarantees. A week changed the rhythm of everything. I marked the days without trying to. Morning visits, evening updates, short conversations with people who knew her vitals better than her story. The crisis had passed, but nothing felt settled. They moved her to a quieter space, away from constant traffic. Fewer lights, fewer voices. The door stayed closed most of the time. When it opened, everyone moved with care. She was standing now. Not confidently, not for long, but on her own legs. The injured one was supported, wrapped, and monitored. The weight shifted away from it by instinct. Pain still lived in her movements, visible in every careful step, but the collapse I had feared never came. She watched people closely. Any sound made her ears turn, any shadow held her attention. The wildness had not softened. If anything, it had sharpened again as her strength returned. That was a good sign, they told me, a necessary one. I kept my distance. There was no touching, no calming words meant for comfort. When I spoke, it was only to answer questions, never to her. The staff insisted on that boundary, and I understood why. Familiarity could be as dangerous as neglect. One afternoon, she looked directly at me. Not through me, not past me, at me. Her eyes were clear now, steady and alert. No fear, no recognition. Just awareness. The look lasted only a moment before she turned away, uninterested. My chest tightened anyway. "She does not associate you with safety," a handler said quietly. "That is good." I nodded, though part of me had hoped for something else. They talked about progress in careful terms, stabilized, improving, still fragile. The balance was thin. Too much stress could undo days of healing. Too much isolation could slow recovery. Every decision felt precise and temporary. I learned to measure success differently. Not by gratitude or connection, but by distance. By the fact that she did not calm when I entered the room. That she stayed wild. At the end of the week, they discussed moving her again, a rehabilitation center, more space, fewer humans, the next step. I watched her pace once more before leaving that day, muscles working under fur that had started to clean and thicken again. She was alive. Not saved in the way stories like to tell it, but balanced on the narrow line between human help and animal independence. For now, that line was holding. The meeting was brief. That was how I knew the decision had already been made. 3 people sat across from me in a small room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee. No papers were spread out, no long explanations prepared. They spoke calmly, carefully, the way people do when there is no perfect outcome to soften. "She will be transferred to a rehabilitation center," the senior vet said. "A controlled environment, minimal human contact, no public access." I waited for the rest. "Release back into the wild will be reassessed later," he continued. "But we need to be honest. Given the severity of her injuries and the level of human interaction she has already endured, full release may not be possible." The words landed without drama. I asked what that meant in practical terms, not emotionally, practically. It meant long recovery, behavioral evaluation, hunting assessments. It meant that if she failed at any stage, she would remain in permanent care, alive, safe, wild in instinct, but not free in geography. "This is not a punishment," the woman added. "It is the option with the highest chance of survival." I believed her. Romantic endings belong to stories told from a distance. Standing inside this process stripped those illusions away. Survival was not about symbolism. It was about margins, risks, and choosing the least damaging path. They asked for my statement about the discovery, location, time, condition. Everything documented, precise, unemotional. I answered carefully, aware that these details mattered beyond this room. When the conversation ended, I walked once more to the enclosure. She stood facing away from me, alert to sounds I could not hear. The space around her was larger now, structured for movement, not confinement. She turned her head briefly, ears flicking, then dismissed me entirely. That was how it should be. I felt no triumph standing there, no sense of victory, only a quiet acceptance that the right decision was rarely the cleanest one. We had not returned her to the forest, but we had not left her to die by a road either. Between those two outcomes, this was the line we chose to hold. The transport vehicle arrived before sunrise. There was no announcement, no gathering of people, just a low-engine hum in the service yard and the quiet efficiency of those who did this kind of work often. I stood off to the side, hands in my pockets, watching as preparations unfolded. The crate was different this time. Larger, reinforced, built for movement, not emergency. Clean metal bars, solid floor, space to turn without feeling trapped. It was placed carefully near the enclosure, angled to reduce stress, every step rehearsed. She sensed the change immediately. Her pacing slowed, then stopped. Ears turned towards sounds I could barely register. She stood tall now, weight balanced despite the injured leg, muscles defined under fur that had begun to recover its texture. The weakness was still there, but it no longer defined her. They opened the enclosure gate. No one rushed her, no voices pushed. The handler waited, body relaxed, eyes attentive. After a moment that stretched thin, she moved forward on her own, cautious but decisive. When she entered the crate, she did not look back. The door closed with a solid, final sound. I did not step closer. There was nothing left to fix, nothing left to explain. The distance between us was intentional now, a boundary that meant things had gone the way they were supposed to. One of the staff nodded at me. "She has a chance," he said. That was all. The vehicle pulled away slowly, tires rolling over gravel, carrying her toward a place I would never see. I watched until the road swallowed the last trace of movement. The yard felt empty afterward. No dramatic farewell, no gesture exchanged, just the quiet certainty that this was the end of my role in her story. I turned toward my car and stopped once, glancing back at the now silent enclosure. She was gone. And for the first time since that morning by the road, I allowed myself to believe that leaving was not the same as abandoning. Time passed without marking itself clearly. Days folded into weeks, weeks into something quieter. Life returned to its familiar pace, but it did not feel the same. I noticed pauses where there had been none before, small hesitations that made space for attention. I drove that road again. Not by accident. I chose it early one morning when the forest looked much like it had before. Same trees, same curve where the asphalt narrowed. The place where I had stopped was easy to recognize. The tree was still there. The ground beneath it had settled, leaves covering the torn soil, no rope, no marks that would catch an untrained eye. To anyone passing by, it was just another stretch of roadside. I pulled over and stood for a moment. Nothing happened. That was the point. The quiet did not feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Somewhere beyond this place, she was alive, moving through space, designed to keep her wild while giving her time. I did not know what the future held for her, and I did not need to. I had received one update. Stable, eating, alert. That was all it said. No photo, no story attached. I read it once and put the phone away. Standing there, I understood how small the moment had been when I first noticed the shadow. How easy it would have been to miss it. The difference between stopping and driving on had taken only a second. People talk about courage like it is loud or dramatic. I knew better now. Sometimes it was just staying when leaving would have been simpler. I got back into the car and drove on. The forest closed around the road behind me, indifferent and unchanged. I carried something it would never reflect back. A quiet certainty. That attention matters, that action, even brief and imperfect, can interrupt cruelty, and that indifference is not neutral. It is a decision. As the road disappeared in the mirror, I did not feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had chosen not to look away.
Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And now just click the playlist or the next video on your screen.